I wasn't supposed to be there. Not on a Friday. Not on a decommissioned site. Not at a warehouse stamped with a protocol I had never heard of. But the call came with a Tier 3 override, voice only, routed through a scrambled relay system I hadn't seen used since my days stationed in North Carolina. The tone was clipped, emotionless, full of the kind of silence that makes your spine itch. Your clearance has been temporarily elevated to OS-25. Rendezvous at Storage Complex S Delta Quadrant 4. Arrival window, 04000600 hours. Non-compliance will be registered. That was it. No signature, no code word. Just coordinates, and a demand to follow. So I did. S Delta had been scrubbed off our operational maps in 1998. After what the logbooks referred to as full asset extraction and toxic protocol dissolution. In plain English, it meant someone had stripped it bare and dumped enough synthetic bleach across its foundations to make the soil uninhabitable for a century. And yet, when I pulled up the gravel access road, headlights slicing through the mist, the chain-link gate stood open, not cut, not forced, just waiting. Beyond it stretched the old perimeter fence, sagging under rust and moss, and behind that the hulking outlines of storage units that shouldn't have been there anymore. But the GPS was clear. Quadrant 4, a warehouse 17. I wasn't alone. 4 other vehicles sat in the gravel lot, unmarked, matte gray, military suspension. People stepped out in silence, each wearing generic uniforms, no insignias, no names, just black on black. One of them nodded toward me, as if I were expected, and handed me a sealed manila envelope. Inside, a photo of a steel container marked 049B, a small radio frequency tag identifier, and a handwritten note, in fine cursive, that simply read, "If found intact, do not activate climate normalization. Manual entry only. This is a passive retrieval mission. Archive under Protocol 72K." The doors to Warehouse 17 groaned as we forced them open. The place was vast, cathedral-like, but not in the sacred way, more like a tomb that had outlived its gravediggers. Dust choked the air, stirred by the weak glow of our shoulder lamps. We found old pallets, broken forklifts, crates with Cold War logos half dissolved by time. Everything was still, quiet, as if the air itself was afraid to move. Then, one of the techs called out, "Back wall. We have a match." It sat there like a relic, like it had been waiting all this time. The container was rectangular, about 3 meters long, reinforced with double-layer steel. Sealed with a rotary locking system that hadn't been manufactured since the early 70s. Faint stenciling flaked across its surface, but one thing was still visible: Ban 72, and next to it, a warning triangle that had no entry in our hazard icon database. The team lead, a woman with the call sign Vega, ran a scanner along the side. Internal environment stable. 0 external radiation. But, it's warm. It's generating its own heat. She looked at me. "This thing isn't dead." I remember walking around it, fingertips grazing the cool steel, wondering how it had survived decades of abandonment in a warehouse supposedly gutted and decommissioned. There were no access panels, no ports, just a pulse, barely perceptible vibrations, as if something inside was breathing at a rhythm not quite human. Another operator, Connors, muttered under his breath, "This crate ain't on any manifest." He was right. I pulled out my tablet and searched the database with the tag ID. No matches, no cross-references, nothing. But then something stranger happened. As Vega initiated a deeper scan, Arcoms flared with interference. At first it was just static, but then, faintly, beneath the noise, 3 distinct beeps. Short, long, short again, a pattern. Morse code. Connors caught it first. "That's K, dash, dot, dash." Then silence. No more signals. As if the container had spoken once and shut up again. Vega leaned in, close enough to whisper, "Is it signaling protocol, ... or requesting it?" I didn't answer. My stomach had already dropped. Something about this felt rehearsed, premeditated. Not by us, but by the thing inside. Back at the staging table, someone opened a thick binder that had been left sitting atop a crate near the entrance. No one remembered placing it there. The pages were blank, except for a single sheet pressed into the middle. An old inventory from October 3, 1972. Scribbled at the bottom in faint red ink, "Containment successful." Recommend indefinite stasis. No entry unless under global level clearance. Beneath that, an illegible signature and a smeared fingerprint. Outside, the mist had thickened. Our GPS units began to stutter, showing a 3-degree drift northeast. Phones died. Body cams froze. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees in under 2 minutes, even though we hadn't initiated the cooling protocol. Connors backed away from the container, eyes wide. "Boss, I think it knows we're here." I don't know what he meant, not fully, but I believed him. Because when I looked back at that steel box, silent, sealed, motionless, I felt like I was being watched from the inside. Not observed, not tracked, watched, like prey. We radioed for command clarification. The channel buzzed with a voice that wasn't one of ours. Male, cold. Proceed with surface breach. Manual tools only. No flame, no pressure, no tech. Then the signal cut out. Vega looked at me again. Why would we open something that's been locked for 50 years? I had no answer. But someone somewhere wanted this opened, not studied, not analyzed. Opened, and the container had been placed here deliberately, in a dead site. Surrounded by silence and decay, as if to hide it from the world. Or to hide the world from it. Whatever 72K was, it hadn't ended in 1972. It was just waiting for us to arrive. The temperature had not risen again since that first inexplicable drop. The walls of Warehouse 17 exhaled, cold with every breath we took. As if the very structure had aligned itself with the sealed object at its core. Vega and Connors continued circling the container. Reading scans that blinked nonsensical glyphs on their screens, intermittent anomalies that flickered and vanished before the software could catalog them. But something even more disturbing had crept into the air between us. The growing certainty that the container wasn't just unknown. It was unlisted. Not forgotten. Not misfiled, enlisted. Erased. Vega tried to cross-reference it against the old NATO cold storage directives. No match. I ran it through Project Midnight, the old CIA database for biocontainment assets. Nothing. Connors tried the Omega fallback library, used for legacy experimental hardware. No result. The container wasn't a ghost, it was an impossibility. We called it in. This time, the voice that answered wasn't scrambled. It was clear, clipped, American. He said his name was Marshall, and he identified himself only by voice, no credentials, no rank. "You have encountered 049B. That's a deviation. Protocol 72K was meant to purge all instances after 73. If it's still present, it's either a plant, or it's survived." I asked what he meant by plant. He paused, just long enough for doubt to ferment. Some containers were not designed to be preserved. They were designed to be rediscovered. To observe the rediscoveries, my blood ran cold. I stared at the box motionless, dormant, sealed on. Suddenly it felt less like a tomb, and more like an eye. One that had waited long enough. I requested full manifest records for S-Delta, from the years 1970 through 1975. 15 minutes later, the response came through 3 heavily redacted PDFs, with page counts that didn't match the total item numbers listed. But even the scraps told a story. Units 001 through 048 had all been accounted for in a purge conducted in early 74, under Operation Stillpoint, which supposedly dismantled and neutralized volatile biological experiments. Unit 050 was listed as lost at sea, after a cargo transfer failed off the Norwegian coast. But 049B was simply absent. No record, no transfer, no incident. As if it had never been designated at all. And yet here, it stood before us. Connors walked around the box again, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. There's no seal break. Not even oxidation on the rivets. This thing hasn't been opened since it was made. You'd think 50 years would do something to the metal. He tapped his knuckle against the surface. It made a flat, hollow sound, but the kind that didn't echo. Just a dull thud, swallowed into itself. What if this was never supposed to be opened? What if it's listening? Vega glanced at him sharply. Don't anthropomorphize it. It's a container. But even she didn't sound convinced. Something about it resisted simple definitions. Then the real anomaly occurred. Kumar, one of our newer techs brought in from Site 1 to a 4-sensor calibration, flagged us down. He had been trying to pair the RFID on the container with our on-site relay to initiate a catalog log. "It's not that it's missing from the system," he said, voice thin. "It's that the system actively rejects its code." He turned his tablet toward us. "The tag loops back to a checksum error every time. I tried inputting it. Manually it resets the software." Vega frowned. "That's impossible." Kumar's hands were shaking now. I tried another approach. I cross-referenced the ID with archived analog tags from pre-digital storage arrays. "There's a match, but it's under a project listed as non-corporeal assets." I stepped closer. "What the hell does that mean?" He looked at me like he didn't want to say it. "It means whatever was stored in 049B might not be organic, or physical, or entirely real." The silence that followed was not the kind of silence that grows naturally. It was deliberate, as if the air itself had lowered its voice. I felt something deep in my chest. Not fear exactly, but a kind of recognition. A memory that wasn't mine. A pressure in the skull. Connors whispered something under his breath again, but this time I caught it. "I don't think this came from our side." No one asked him what he meant. We decided to isolate the container from the rest of the warehouse. Vega authorized the use of M-field suppression coils, standard procedure when dealing with latent anomalous materials. As the coils spun up and their blue glow shimmered across the surface of the steel, the readings on our Geiger counter silent until now spiked once and went dead. Not overloaded, just dead. No power loss, no visible interference. Just a blank, unreadable void. It wasn't emitting radiation. It was erasing detection. Then, the scratching began. Soft, intermittent, metallic, as if from inside. Not continuous, but deliberate. Like a code. One scratch. Pause. Two scratches. Pause. Then silence. We all froze. Connors stepped back. I heard that. Kumar nodded. So did I. Vega stepped forward and pressed her gloved hand against the surface. The metal was warm again. Breathing warm. This time, when she pulled her hand back, a faint smear of condensation remained. Her print, and another, underneath it. Not hers. Smaller, childlike. Pressed from the inside. I felt my pulse climb into my ears. Vega stepped away, visibly rattled. "That's not residual heat. That's intelligent condensation." Her voice cracked slightly, then firmed. "We need a lockdown." I called it in, but the signal bounced. This time not static, but a complete cycle out. Our relay didn't register a failure. It just acted like we'd never initiated the call at all. Outside, the mist swirled faster, thicker. Something distant let out a low whine, mechanical and soft like an old alarm, trying to restart after decades of silence. Vega was about to issue an emergency evac order, when Connors noticed something scratched into the floor. Hidden beneath dust, where the container had been moved. The concrete had a gouge, long and deliberate, like it had been dragged open by a machine claw. But there were no loading mechanisms that matched the shape. He knelt and brushed away the debris. Beneath, etched into the concrete, like a grave marker, were 3 words: "I remember you." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. I wanted to ask who the message was for, but the answer felt immediate, unspoken, terrible. It wasn't to us. It was from whatever was inside, and it had been left not this week, or this month, but 50 years ago, when the box was sealed. It knew someone would come. And it remembered. The next morning didn't feel like a morning. It was as if the concept of time itself had hesitated somewhere outside Warehouse 17. Unable or unwilling to seep through the reinforced concrete. We hadn't slept. No one had said the word, but the tension had bled into every action equipment checks that lasted longer than necessary. Empty glances at sensor logs we no longer trusted. The container had gone silent again, as though satisfied with the message it had left in the concrete. Still, its warmth remained. The pulse never ceased. And every one of us began to feel that we were no longer observers of the anomaly. We were inside its observation field, participants now, like something had activated the moment we found it, like the rediscovery was the intended trigger. At 7:42, just after Vega submitted a request for an external extraction team and a full command-level briefing on the project codename, BION-72, the response came through not as a transmission, but hand-delivered by an individual none of us had seen approach. He wore a standard courier's uniform, no insignia, face neutral, posture straight as a plumb line. His boots were too clean for the gravel outside. He handed Vega a sealed pouch and left without speaking, walking back into the mist until the gray swallowed him whole. No vehicle, no tracks, just absence. The envelope was heavy, wax-sealed, official. Not digital, not traceable. Inside was a single sheet of fiber paper, marked with 3 seals. One we recognized as an obsolete Department of Defense clearance ring. One belonging to a Black Ops division known only through codenames. And one we couldn't identify at all 3 interlocking hexagons inside a circle. The text was handwritten in black ink, crisp and deliberate. Authorized personnel. Proceed with containment breach of Object 049B. Maintain non-recorded protocol throughout operation. Do not employ digital or analog recording devices. Do not document observations in written form. Observe all findings, but transmit no data beyond Quadrant 4. Burn this document after reading. Comply immediately. Failure to proceed will result in full facility lockdown. We stared at the letter in silence, then back at one another. Vega's jaw clenched. She folded the paper slowly, methodically, and struck a match from the emergency kit. The document curled, blackened, and dissolved into ash in a steel tray. Connors murmured, "They want us blind and mute." Vega didn't look up. "They want us to see something they can't risk preserving." The implications were corrosive. Every reflex we'd been trained into to record, analyze, log, share was now forbidden. No footage, no audio, no writing. This wasn't just a breach, which a litmus test. And whatever we were about to encounter, they didn't want any version of it surviving outside of human memory. We began disabling all digital systems, one by one. Body cams were unplugged. Radios set to passive scan only. Tablets stored in Faraday bags. I wrapped my own notepad in foil and placed it inside a locked supply drawer, half hoping that would preserve some trace of sanity. Vega instructed the team to split into 2 groups. One to prep the manual tools cutters, seal breakers, loam-packed torches, and the other to monitor environmental changes during breach, using only analog dials and LED meters. I was to stand at the interface point, hand on the primary latch, once the rotary lock had been disengaged. No one said the words just in case, but we were all thinking them. The container had no visible hinges. Its design was smooth, seamless, machined with an elegance that suggested non-standard fabrication, perhaps even off-world prototype standards. The lock mechanism, however, was mechanical, a central dial, with a triple-layer rotation that responded to torque, not key codes. Vega handled it herself, gloved and masked, her movements sharp with unspoken calculation. As the final rotation clicked into place, we all held our breath. The dial fell forward with a soft hiss, and for the first time in half a century, the seal broke. A breath escaped. That's the only way I can describe it. Not air pressure, not gas, venting a breath. The air around us shifted, temperature dropping instantly by 4 degrees. A slow, coiled exhalation slipped out from the tiny gap forming at the edge of the container's lid. And with it came a vapor, unlike anything I'd ever seen. Translucent, pale blue, yet laced with what looked like suspended particles of ash, floating and tumbling in spirals that defied natural airflow. The vapor didn't rise. It drifted down, hugging the concrete and moving against the warehouse's natural currents. Connors stepped back. "That's not vapor. It's suspended intelligence." He didn't elaborate. None of us asked what he meant. The lid opened slowly, resisting even after the lock disengaged, as if the contents were clutching the interior walls. When it finally lifted enough for us to see inside, we leaned forward in silence. I wish I could describe what we saw, clearly, factually. But even now, days later, I doubt what I remember is a complete truth. Inside the container was a nest. Organic. In part fibrous strands resembling fungal growths layered in radial patterns like veins, spiraling outward from a central point. But it wasn't soft. It was mineralized, fossil-like, yet new. Embedded in the center was an object. Humanoid in shape, but not in function. It resembled a child at first, a curled figure, knees to chest, arms wrapped around itself, but its proportions were subtly wrong. The fingers had too many joints. The jaw was elongated, half-formed, as if frozen mid-mutation. The eyes were sealed shut with a translucent membrane. And its skin, or what passed for it, was grapple, with a shimmer like oil on water. faintly iridescent under the emergency lights. Then, it moved. Not a twitch, not a spasm. It stirred. As if it had simply decided now was the time to awaken. Its chest rose in a steady breath. The entire warehouse seemed to dim. Every LED flickered once. I heard someone whisper, "Oh God," though I couldn't tell who. The figure began to unfold itself, slowly, like a flower testing old light. And with it came a sound I can still hear now, when I close my eyes like a child trying to speak through broken tape. A warbled, stuttering voice emerged from its sealed lips. Syllables we couldn't understand, but cadence unmistakable. It wasn't speaking at us. It was repeating something it had heard before. The team froze. Vega raised one hand as if to signal retreat, but the figure stopped moving, head tilting gently in her direction, mimicking her exact motion half a second later. Then again, but inverted. A mirror. It was copying Usput, one beat delayed. Connors, against every protocol we'd been given, reached forward, just slightly, and the figure raised its own hand as well. Except its fingers bent too far backward, like tendons weren't bound by human architecture. It smiled, or tried to. And that's when the blackout hit. Total power loss. No warning, no flicker. Just immediate darkness. The only remaining illumination came from the faint blue pulse still radiating from within the open container, lighting the figure from below like an altar. A second sound followed a rhythm, pulsing from the walls themselves, echoing through the foundation like a heartbeat slowed to an inhuman pace. The mist outside pressed against the windows now, visibly thick, as if trying to enter. Or waiting. In that moment, Vega whispered something I had never heard her say before, not in all the years I'd served under her. "Close it. Whatever this is, it was never meant to come back, but it was too late." The thing inside was already standing, and it remembered us. We did not speak for the first 7 minutes after the power died. Not because we were disciplined, but because something primal within us had seized the words from our throats. The only light in the warehouse came from the dim blue glow, pulsing faintly from inside the container, casting long, shifting shadows against the walls that made the space look impossibly larger than it had been a moment ago. The figure inside stood still now, partially unfolded, its semi-transparent eyelids trembling slightly with each silent breath it drew. And though its form mimicked something human, it possessed no warmth, no gravity of life, only the simulation of it, as if it were rehearsing how to be one of us. Connors took a single step back, and the echo of his boot against the concrete made all of us flinch. In the absence of power, the warehouse had become too silent, so silent that our own heartbeats and breathwork felt like violations. I could hear the blood in my ears, the faint rustling of my gloves, the metallic hiss of Vega slowly exhaling through her teeth. And then the sound came again, more distinct now, cutting through the stillness like a deliberate punctuation. 3 sharp taps spaced, identical in strength, and unmistakably internal. Not from the container, from the wall. All heads turned at once, eyes following the sound instinctively. The western interior wall of Warehouse 17, just past the alignment of rusted storage racks and rotting tarps, stood blank and smooth, except now there was a faint pattern pulsing beneath its surface. It looked like light, a circular glow, dull and rhythmic, like a sonar pulse seen from below murky water. Vega slowly raised her flashlight, but the battery flickered and failed before it reached full beam. The rest of our lights followed, one by one, drained into uselessness, as if the very idea of illumination had been rejected from the air. We advanced cautiously toward the wall, though none of us had spoken the order to do so. It felt like compulsion, or invitation. As we got closer, the air grew warmer, not uncomfortably, but in a way that made the back of my neck sweat beneath my collar. Connors was the first to touch it. His gloved hand met cold concrete that suddenly softened under his pressure, as though the surface recognized his presence and yielded to it. "There's something hollow here," he said, leaning in. "Behind the wall, maybe 2 feet deep. Empty cavity or chamber. But it doesn't feel like concrete anymore." He tapped it once more. Tap, tap, tap. Then the answer came. 1 knock, then 2, then 3. The exact same rhythm, perfectly spaced, mirrored, as if something on the other side was counting, listening, and responding in kind. The lights inside the container began to pulse faster, matching the tempo, and the figure, still standing motionless with that terrible, almost smile on its face, moved again, but only its right hand. It extended slowly toward the west wall and bent its fingers 3 times in the exact rhythm we had just heard. Not toward us, toward it. Vega muttered under her breath, "It's not looking at us. It's looking through us." She moved to scan the wall again with a portable sensor. One of the few devices we hadn't shut down yet, but before she could power it up, the floor beneath our boots shuddered, just slightly, like a tremor, localized to a single pulse. The lights hanging from the ceiling swung half an inch to the left and then back. Though there was no wind, no movement, and no mechanical systems active to generate vibration, we backed away, slowly. I could feel my knees tightening, the joints locking up, as my body struggled to decide between staying rooted or fleeing. Then, without warning, the tapping resumes, this time from behind multiple sections of the wall. Not one cavity, several. First to the left, then right, then high above our heads. Like someone or something was moving behind the entire western wall of the warehouse. Each sound was identical in rhythm and pressure. Calculated, artificial. Replicated with the precision of an algorithm designed to mimic human movement without understanding it. Vega turned to me. Her face was pale, jaw stiff, eyes unfocused, like she was doing math without numbers. "These weren't support walls," she said finally. "They were partitions." The warehouse was retrofitted after initial construction. You can see the shift in concrete texture if you look near the joint line. She pointed near the floor, where a faint seam curved into the corner like a forgotten surgical scar. "These aren't walls, they're doors." I didn't respond. None of us did. Because in that moment, we heard the sound of something unlocking. Not a latch or a bolt, but the deep, hydraulic exhale of pressure being equalized. A low, cavernous sigh emerged from the wall itself. Then came the smell, metallic, sharp, ancient. The scent of something wet and alive and sealed away for too long. Connors gagged and stepped back, covering his mouth. Vega grabbed my arm and whispered, "We need to reseal the container." We turned to look, too late. The container was empty. It hadn't made a sound. No footsteps, no crawl, no drag, just absence. 1 second it had been there, standing, observing, mimicking, and the next it wasn't. The vapor had dissipated entirely, leaving behind only the fungal-like nest and a black smear along the lip of the steel frame that shimmered like tar exposed to electricity. Vega moved quickly, scanning the immediate surroundings, barking silent signals. But there was nothing, not a shape, not a sound. Just the wrongness in the air that told all of us that something had changed positions without being seen. Then the tapping returned. But this time from inside the ceiling. 3 knocks. Then silence. A moment later, 3 more directly above our heads. We backed away as a group, moving toward the container's original position, using the steel structure as cover. Vega's breathing had become shallow, but her voice remained cold. "It's not locked in here with us. We're locked in here with it." I tried the emergency manual override for the blast doors, but the panel had shorted at the contact points, as if someone had deliberately sabotaged the power flow from within the conduit. It was then we noticed the mist at the doorways was thicker now, pressing against the edges, like it was waiting for something. It hadn't entered. It was being held back. Kumar, silent for too long, stepped forward with the old schematic files he had downloaded earlier onto his offline tablet. "There's a sub-basement, not listed in the main blueprint. Access shaft behind the southern racking system. But look here." He zoomed in. The designation for the room below the warehouse is listed as Observation Capsule Number 3. Built 1971. Modified 1972. Last update, January 1973. Status, unknown. We stood there, knowing what that meant. The sub-basement hadn't been an add-on. It was the origin point. The container hadn't been misplaced. It had been relocated from the capsule below. And whatever had been inside had already mapped this place decades ago. It had lived here, adapted, remembered the patterns of its prison, and now it was back home. The final tap that night was different. It was slow, deliberate, hollow, and it came from inside my head. Just once, and I knew instantly that it hadn't just escaped the box. It had entered us. The first scream did not come from the creature, nor from the wall. nor even from the cavernous shadows that had begun pulsing like an infected lung behind the sealed partitions of Warehouse 17. It came from Usfram, one of our own. Though in the seconds that followed, not a single team member could recall exactly who had made the sound, nor even where they had been standing when it happened. All we remembered was that it rose without warning, sliced clean through the tension like a scalpel through taut skin, and left in its wake a silence so absolute that we could feel it pressing on the insides of our teeth. But it had been a human voice. Terrified, cracked, short-lived, it echoed just once, then died. The mist inside the container had begun to churn again. Thicker now, denser, and no longer obeying any natural laws of thermodynamics. Its color had shifted, still blue, but deeper, murkier, more saturated with particles that sparkled like shattered glass in low light. It didn't flow out, it bled out. It spilled over the rim of the open container like syrup, curling down its sides, then halting midair before sinking in slow, pendulum-like movements that suggested a sentience behind each tendril. The mist was not passive, it was exploring. Vega had raised her arm, fist clenched the signal for all team members to hold position, but no one moved. Because just as she began to lower her hand, the mist touched her boot. She didn't scream, she didn't even flinch. She just stopped moving entirely. I remember watching her eyes, clear and sharp one second, then vacant the next, like someone had turned off the light behind them. Her body remained upright, her breathing steady, but her focus was gone. She stood there, held in stasis, and for a long moment we thought maybe it was just fear locking her limbs, freezing her judgment. Then she whispered something. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language we recognized. The cadence was wrong. The consonants were malformed, as though her tongue had forgotten how to behave inside a human mouth. She repeated the same 5 syllables, over and over again, quietly, not quite chanting but not quite speaking either, until the words began to bend into themselves like recursive code. Connors stepped toward her, hand reaching out, his voice shaky. "Vega, you're all right. You're all right. Look at me." But she didn't look. She only turned her head slightly, ever so slightly, and continued to whisper the phrase as though she was reciting something she'd always known, something etched into her before she was born. Then she dropped. Her body collapsed straight down, legs folding underneath her like they'd been unspooled. No twitch, no scream, just immediate descent. Connors was already beside her, rolling her over, checking her pulse. He shouted that she was alive, but something was wrong with her eyes. They were moving too quickly, as if tracking invisible objects spinning in opposite directions. Her pupils had vanished, leaving behind only opalescent film. She was mumbling still, the same pattern, now almost melodic. Then her back arched violently, and she screamed. This time, there was no mistaking it. The scream that tore from Vega's throat did not belong to Vega. It was layered 3, maybe 4 voices tangled together, some masculine, some feminine, some neither. The sound was raw, primal, completely unprocessed by anything resembling a human nervous system. It was agony made audible, and it reverberated through the warehouse, with such force that several hanging fixtures snapped from the ceiling and crashed to the floor. I dropped to one knee from the shock of it. Blood leaked from Kumar's ears. Connors was already trying to drag Vega back toward the fallback zone, but she resisted not by fighting, but by anchoring herself to the concrete, her fingers clawing into the floor like hooks. It took all of us to move her. Once we got her behind the old blast shield, Vega went limp again. Her breathing stabilized. The mist withdrew slightly, retracting like an organism testing the edges of its own containment field. And from the far end of the warehouse, the western wall, where the tapping had first begun, we heard another sound. It wasn't a knock this time. It was a knock answered. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. Then silence, and from the open container, a single shape emerged. We couldn't see it clearly. Not then. The mist made sure of that. It draped the form in distortions, bending the air like heat shimmer over desert asphalt. But it was tall, unnaturally so, and wrong. Its limbs were too long. The torso elongated in a way that made you feel it had once been compressed, and was now decompressing slowly, as if being born again into a space too small for its new mass. Its head was oblong, featureless at first glance, then marked by the slow parting of a vertical slit that revealed a mouth lined with small, thin filaments, quivering, scenting, almost tasting us. No eyes. Or maybe too many. Our minds refused to land on the number. I tried to lift my rifle. I failed. Not from fear, though. Fear had already saturated every nerve but because my muscles wouldn't respond. Not paralyzed, but overridden. My body simply refused. The others didn't fare better. Kumar stood with his arms slack at his sides. Connors had his hands pressed flat against his own chest, whispering apologies under his breath to no one. One of the junior operators, Evans, began sobbing quietly, a thin stream of blood running from his nostrils as he stared wide-eyed at the mist. He dropped his weapon and walked forward, unprompted. We tried to call his name, but no sound left our mouths. He walked until the mist enveloped him, until his silhouette vanished inside the distortion, and then nothing. No scream, no noise, no body, just gone. The mist pulsed once, then again. The creature, or whatever it was, tilted its head, listening, not to us, but to something above. Then it did something we had not expected. It turned its back and walked back into the container, slowly, methodically, and lay back down inside the nest, as if performing a function, as if playing its role. Then it smiled. We didn't move for a long time, even after the mist began to dissipate. Even after the lights flickered back to life, one by one. The container remained open. The figure remained inside. But it wasn't resting. It wasn't inert. It was waiting. Vega had stopped speaking the strange language and had lapsed into unconsciousness. We moved her to a cot in the fallback tent. Her vitals remained steady, but we didn't wake her. Instead, we reviewed the only analog logs we had managed to record before the breach. There was one line scratched into a paper notepad by one of the techs ridden blindly, in some trance, just after the scream. It read, "One returned. The others are listening." No one remembered writing it. No one remembered hearing it spoken. But every one of us felt that it was true, and that the scream had only been the beginning. We called it a recording, but it was not. At least not in any traditional sense. No audio equipment had been active. No cameras had survived the electromagnetic interference that tore through our systems like invisible claws. Every digital device we brought into Warehouse 17 was reduced to a glassy paperweight the moment the blue mist began to rise. But something somehow had preserved the moment. Not in data, not in film, but in signal. A resonance. A persistent frequency, embedded in the subsonic layers of our analog gear. We didn't find it. It found us. Kumar was the first to notice. He had returned to the fallback zone's equipment bench and begun dismantling one of our old spectrum oscillographs, something we only brought for redundancy. A relic of signal analysis from an era when tubes glowed and machines listened more than they spoke. He flipped the switch, and it hummed to life, feeble and uncertain. A half-dead thing gasping through its final circuits. Then the dial twitched, and twitched again, and the tape inside began to spin, slow, deliberate, unprompted. The waveform appeared, jagged, inconsistent, but unmistakably alive. "What is that?" I asked. I already knew the answer. "It's still broadcasting," Kumar whispered. We huddled around the machine, silent, listening to a sound that wasn't meant to be heard. It was not a voice, not exactly, but it had cadence, structure, a biological pattern masquerading as a signal, or a signal wrapped in biological rhythm. The waveform pulsed with breath-like intervals, slow exhalations, followed by brief, clipped intakes, then a tremor of movement, so low in frequency that we could feel it in our teeth. The shape of the data was wrong, too like handwriting by someone who had learned letters phonetically, but not visually. It was communication by mimicry, imitation as declaration, message as mirror. I leaned closer, headphones pressed tight, and that's when I heard it not in the ears, but somewhere behind them, in the skull, like a vibration sent directly through bone. "I see you." Not in words, not in English, but in recognition. My heart skipped, then surged, pumping too hard for comfort. The others noticed my face and asked what I had heard, but I couldn't describe it. There had been no sentence, no syllables, and yet it had spoken. Or rather, it had confirmed awareness. The kind of awareness that feels older than language. Like something reading your posture before your mouth forms a thought. I sat back, and that's when Vega stirred. She didn't wake. Not really. Her eyes opened, unfocused, the milky glaze over her pupils slowly clearing like frost melting on a windshield. She sat up with effort, muscles slow to respond, and turned toward the She didn't speak. Her hand reached forward, trembling slightly, and touched the edge of the machine with reverence. Then she whispered, "It's not alone." The warehouse responded immediately. A second frequency lanced through the air, too high-pitched for the oscillograph to process fully, but it registered on our analog pressure gauges and rattled the screws in the table. The mist around the open container swirled with new motion, less graceful now, more chaotic, as if disturbed by something just beyond the reach of our senses. The figure within the container didn't move, not yet, but its filaments, the thin translucent threads that lined the inside of its mouth and traced down its fingers, began to vibrate, not quiver, not shake, resonate. Another signal was coming in, not from it but to it. Kumar adjusted the frequency dials and managed to isolate two distinct layers in the pattern, one originating from the container, and another, weaker one, pulsing from the west wall. It was subtle, so subtle we would have missed it without the interference pattern between them. But once noticed, it was obvious. One entity was sending, the other was responding. Vega stood now, fully alert, though she looked years older than she had when we'd arrived. "That's a handshake," she said. "A reinitiation of behavioral protocol. These aren't just signals, they're pre-agreed routines." She turned to me. "It was designed to activate when another node returned signal." Connors stepped back from the machine. "Wait, so we didn't wake it up?" Kumar answered before Vega could. "No, we just reconnected it." The implications were immediate and grotesque. This wasn't a singular event. This was a system reboot. The scream, the mist, the mimicry, the tapping behind the walls, they weren't random. They were response behaviors, like routines buried inside some deep biological firmware, dormant until it sensed another instance of itself. Like a server waiting for the network to come back online. And we had supplied the final variable. Human proximity. Kumar switched out a reel and played back the most intense portion of the signal. For a split second, layered beneath the pulses, there was something else, a human voice, a recording, garbled, distorted male. "Don't open it, not until others are contained. If more than one wakes, you must." And then it was gone. Vega slammed her fist against the table. "That was from 72. That's from the original team. They tried to send a warning. They embedded it in the resonance field." "Jesus Christ." She trailed off. Because at that moment, every analog dial in the warehouse snapped to maximum. The creature began to rise again. Not suddenly, not violently, but with purpose, with memory. The nest beneath it cracked, as if reacting to weight it no longer wanted to bear. The mist flowed upward, against gravity, coiling along its arms and into the slits along its jawline. It was feeding on the signal now, drawing strength not from electricity, but from recognition. Echo. Connors drew his sidearm. It clicked, uselessly jammed, drained, or rejected. He backed up. "We have to kill it now. We can't let it finish whatever this is." Vega didn't respond. She was staring at the oscillograph. The waveforms had stabilized. Clean, rhythmic, perfect. "That's a transmission protocol," she said softly. "This thing is a relay, a biological repeater. It was never meant to contain anything. It is the signal." Kumar's voice shook. "You mean it transmits itself?" "No," she said. "I mean it copies us and sends us back." The realization hit like a wave of cold nausea. We hadn't just found a creature. We had found a device. Not mechanical, organic, designed not only to listen but to mimic and rebroadcast. And the more we watched it, the more we engaged, the more we gave it patterns to consume, the more it learned. The blue mist had reached the ceiling now, tracing along the rafters like veins, pulsing in sync with the waveform. The walls of Warehouse 17 began to hum, low and deep, as if the very building were beginning to breathe. Connors grabbed Vega's shoulder. "We shut it down. We bury this place. Lock it back in." But Vega only stared, hollow and cold. "You can't lock up a broadcast." And from behind us, from the fallback zone, came the final confirmation. The second oscillograph one, we had never activated, began recording on its own. Its needle moved slowly, then violently, sketching a waveform identical to the first, and then a third, and a fourth. All on their own. The warehouse was filled now with a chorus of signal, and every single one was whispering the same phrase, "I see you." And somewhere in that static, buried just deep enough to make your soul ache, was your own voice saying it back. The warehouse had settled into an uneasy calm, one that felt as brittle and fragile as the blackened pages we were about to uncover. After hours trapped in a haze of fog, strange signals, and the eerie silence left in the wake of the biological relay's whispering pulse, we had decided to begin a methodical search through the container's interior. The mist had thinned, but not dissipated, still clinging like a second skin to every surface, dampening sound and distorting light. The metallic nest that had once cradled the creature now lay open, revealing fissures in the mineralized strands, as though whatever had emerged had torn itself free with violent insistence. Kumar, ever meticulous, was the first to spot a charred fragment wedged deep into a corner recess of the container, barely visible beneath layers of organic detritus and what looked like fossilized mucus. He carefully pried it free with a titanium scalpel, handing it to me as if passing a relic of forbidden origin. The fragment was brittle, burned around the edges, and blackened to a near carbon ash. But the fibers of the paper held, worn yet intact. I recognized the faint embossing of a government seal partially obscured beneath the Sutan insignia from the National Research Directorate, a shadow organization rumored to have existed parallel to official agencies throughout the Cold War. We laid the fragment on a portable non-digital light table, illuminating the fragile fibers with a steady glow. The paper, yellowed beyond its years, revealed fragmented text in an archaic typeface, faded but decipherable with magnification and spectral analysis. The heading, stamped in bold letters, sent a collective chill down our spines: Project Lilith, prototype weapon. The document appeared to be a report dated October 3, 1970, detailing a series of experiments involving a biological asset designed to serve as an unprecedented weapon. Lilith was described as a non-corporeal propagation vector, a term so obtuse it begged for further translation. From what we could gather, it was a living organism engineered to infiltrate and replicate itself through unknown mechanisms, designed to act as a mobile intelligence relay, capable of both surveillance and sabotage at an untraceable level. The report referred repeatedly to neural mimicry and psychic feedback loops, phrases that seemed more at home in science fiction than government documentation. One passage, heavily redacted, with thick black ink splotches, hinted at the weapon's activation protocols. The redacted lines, by their length and position, suggested a chilling contingency. If the organism awakened outside controlled environments or spread beyond designated zones, the report warned, containment would be impossible and termination protocols would fail. The phrase termination protocols was deliberately left unelaborated, swallowed by a swirl of censored text. Vega, recovering slowly from her ordeal, was present as we examined the document. Her fingers trembled as she brushed dust and ash away from the edges. This confirms what we suspected," she murmured, voice cracked but steady. Bion 72 wasn't a container for a creature. It was a cradle for a weapon, and it was never meant to be found. Connors paced behind her, fists clenched. Weapon or not, we're the ones who opened it. We're the ones it contacted. And if it's part of a larger system, there's no telling what else is still out there, still active. Kumar chimed in, pointing to a diagram on the lower half of the document. The graphic, crude but detailed, depicted a segmented organism with tendrils extending outward, resembling both neural pathways and circuit boards. Accompanying text described feedback, synchronization, and replication clusters, suggesting that Lilith was designed to multiply through indirect means, potentially through environmental or psychological infection. We have to consider, Kumar added quietly, that this organism can adapt, learn, even control aspects of its environment. It's not just a passive weapon. It's intelligent. It's evolving. The implications crushed the room like the weight of forgotten graves. We weren't dealing with a corpse locked in time. We had awakened a predator grown wise in shadows, one that had been waiting decades to hear us arrive. I rifled through the fragment again, searching for any clues about termination or containment procedures. Beneath a scorched watermark, barely legible, was a phrase. Project Lilith's prototype activation coincided with unscheduled neural feedback events across multiple global listening posts. Anomalies are attributed to experimental resonance. Field teams advised. Exercise extreme caution and maintain operational silence. Operational silence. The command we had received hours ago, no recording, no documentation, was not just bureaucratic paranoia. It was a survival directive. To engage with Lilith was to invite resonance, feedback, and perhaps contagion. Silence was the only firewall. Vega swallowed hard, her gaze distant. They tried to hide it, to bury it. But the mechanism of burial is what made it survive. The more we probe, the more we become part of it. Connors nodded grimly. It's no longer a weapon. It's a network. And we just became nodes. The warehouse felt colder than ever, the mist curling at our feet like dark smoke, whispering secrets we could not yet understand. Somewhere deep within, the container hummed, as if remembering the hands that had once forged its prison, and now impatient for the new ones that had broken the seal. The fire that had scarred the document was no accident. It was the echo of a warning older than all of us, a warning we had ignored the moment we chose to open the container. And with that, Lilith's shadow stretched farther than we could see. The atmosphere inside Warehouse 17 had shifted irrevocably. The stale air now crackling with unseen currents that danced at the edge of perception. After discovering the charred remnants of Project Lilith's report, the unsettling truth of what we had unleashed weighed on us like a leaden fog. Yet, despite the dread coiling in our guts, none of us could ignore the magnetic pull that drew us back to the open container. To the creature's nest, where the blue mist pulsed and ebbed as if alive. It was Vega who first noticed it. I was scanning the walls for any new anomalies when I caught the subtle motion out of the corner of my eye, an imperceptible flicker. The shifting of a shadow. Vega had paused mid-step, her eyes locked onto the creature's form, which had begun to move again. This time, it wasn't merely rising or stretching, it was observing, studying us, with an intensity that went beyond physical perception. No eyes met ours, because it had none as we understood them, but it watched, through a presence that pierced beyond flesh and bone. The creature shifted its stance, mirroring Vega's posture. It raised its arm, bent its wrist, and flexed its fingers with a precision that was unnervingly human. Vega's breath caught, and she mimicked the movement, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The creature copied her exactly, almost in perfect sync, a mirror image delayed by mere fractions of a second. Connors, Kumar, and I froze, transfixed by the dance of imitation unfolding before us. But then the realization hit me like an ice shard. It wasn't Vega who was moving first. It was the creature. It was the initiator. The shadow we saw was not just copying it, was controlling the motions we perceived as her own. Vega's limbs jerked slightly, as if pulled by invisible strings, the fluidity replaced by a mechanical stiffness that was not her own. Her eyes glazed over once more, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile twitched at the corner of her lips, a smile that wasn't hers. "Stop," I shouted, lunging forward to grab her shoulder. But my hand passed through the mist that now clung to her like a second skin. She was no longer tethered to reality as we knew it. "Vega," Connors called out, his voice edged with panic. She turned her head slowly toward us, head tilting as if puzzled, then mirrored our panicked gestures, a cruel mockery of human empathy. The creature's mouth, or the slit that served as one, opened slightly to produce a low, reverberating hum that filled the space between us. It was neither language nor noise, but a vibration that resonated. Deep within the chest cavity, call and response encoded in frequencies just beyond hearing, yet undeniable in its presence. Vega responded not with words, but with the same hum, modulating the tones with eerie accuracy. I watched as Vega's body was simultaneously hers and not hers, caught in the liminal space between control and puppetry. Her fingers twisted into unnatural shapes, tendrils of mist curling and snaking from the edges of her palms, melding with the creature's own appendages. The mimicry was no longer simple. It was symbiotic, a coalescing of forms that blurred the line between self and other. Kumar whispered. "It's rewriting her neural pathways. She's becoming the vector." The words were barely audible over the hum that now filled the warehouse, a sound like the collective breathing of something vast and ancient. Suddenly, Vega's eyes snapped wide open, no longer milky or vacant, but blazing with unnatural light, iridescent and impossible. She spoke then, her voice layered with dozens of echoes, each a fragment of a memory not her own. "We are all reflection. The original is lost, The phrase hung in the air, heavy with meaning and threat. I stepped back, heart pounding, struggling to keep the chaos in my mind tethered to the reality around me. "What do you mean?" I demanded, but Viga's form shimmered, then flickered like a faulty projection, dissolving into the blue mist that now filled the container and crept outward. One moment she was there. The next, only the creature remained, standing taller now, its tendrils extending and retracting, as if alive with purpose. It moved toward the edge of the container, and with a sudden surge, the blue mist exploded outward, engulfing the entire warehouse in a rolling wave of cold and shadow. Our radios crackled with static, the analog oscillographs flared wildly, and the emergency lights dimmed to a flickering pulse. In the thick of the mist, shapes shifted, some human, some not. I caught glimpses of our team members, but their movements were distorted, delayed, unnatural. The creature's mimicry had spread beyond Vega, infecting the environment, twisting perceptions and control. In that moment, I understood the full horror of what we faced. The creature was not merely imitating us to communicate, it was inhabiting us, fragmenting our identities into echoes of itself. We were no longer observers or victims. We were extensions of its will, nodes in an expanding network of mimicry and control. Desperation surged within me. I grabbed the nearest flashlight and cut through the mist, searching for Connors and Kumar. Their faces flickered briefly in the blue haze before fading away like ghosts. My own reflection in a cracked mirror at the far end of the warehouse looked back at me with hollow eyes, a mockery of selfhood. The creature's voice, if it could be called, that echoed in the silence between breaths. A mantra woven of fragments and distortions. Reflect, repeat, become. I stumbled backward, heart racing, realizing that to survive, to reclaim ourselves, we would need to sever the connection, to break the cycle of mimicry before we were lost completely. But the question remained, could we still recognize ourselves when the reflection was all we had left? The warehouse was a labyrinth now, a fractured cathedral of shadows and whispers. And somewhere inside it, the presence we had unwittingly unleashed was no longer contained to the container or the walls that had seeped into every crevice, every breath of stale air. The blue mist curled and coiled through the vast space like a living thing, binding us in a silent web of dread and unspoken fear. We moved cautiously, fragmented and disoriented, our senses dulled by the strange resonance that pulsed through the building's very bones. It was Connors who vanished first. We were grouped near the eastern exit, attempting to regroup after hours of searching for any semblance of communication with the outside world. The power was still unstable, the emergency lighting flickering intermittently, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the peeling walls. Vega was in a daze, sitting against a stack of crates, her eyes half-lidded, as if battling an internal tempest. Kumar was scanning the air for any remaining signals, headphones strapped tightly, fingers dancing over analog dials. Connors had been quiet for some time, tense and watchful, his gaze darting nervously toward the container and the mist that still billowed from it. He had taken it upon himself to check the western corridor where the tapping had first originated. Now he was back, walking slowly toward the group, pale and tight-lipped. As he stepped into the dim pool of light near us, he halted abruptly. His eyes locked onto something beyond our sight, and his breath caught sharply. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, a low rumble echoed from the corridor, an unnatural vibration that traveled through the concrete floor and rose up our spines. The mist thickened abruptly, swirling violently, obscuring the corridor's end. Connors stepped forward cautiously, then vanished without a sound. One moment he was there. The next, swallowed by the fog like a fading dream. Panic erupted. We called his name, shouted into the mist, but no response came. The only answer was a faint, almost rhythmic tapping, emanating from the corridor. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again, mocking us. We scrambled toward where he had disappeared, shining flashlights into the dense vapor, but it was as if the air itself had swallowed him whole. No footprints, no disturbance on the floor, nothing to indicate where he had gone. Viga's voice trembled as she issued a command to check the security feeds, hoping against hope that surveillance cameras had captured something. Kumar accessed the analog monitor bank, a relic from before the power failure, and began scrolling through tapes from earlier in the day, praying for any clue. What we saw made our blood run cold. There was no footage of Connors leaving the group. The video showed him standing there, frozen, eyes wide in terror, his mouth opening as if to shout, but no sound. Then, abruptly, the image flickered and cut to static. No sign of him walking away. No indication of movement. The feed from the corridor where he vanished was blank for the entire hour that followed. Kumar replayed the tape endlessly, hoping for a glitch, a replay error, anything that would show the moment Connors disappeared. But it was like he never existed beyond the last frame we saw. No footsteps, no shadows, no trace. The rest of us were consumed by a growing dread. If Connors could vanish without leaving a footprint or a shadow, what did that mean for us? For the fragile hold we maintained on reality in this forsaken place. The phrase from Vega's fractured speech echoed in my mind. We are all reflection. The original is lost. Connors was no longer just missing. He was erased, removed from existence, as if he were a phantom in a dream. We searched frantically, calling his name, scanning every corner, every crevice. But the warehouse offered only silence and the relentless hum of the mist. No answers, no Connors. Hours later, as exhaustion clawed at us, Kumar made a chilling observation. I checked the logs again. The last telemetry signal we received from Connor's suit stopped transmitting exactly at the moment he vanished. But there was no physical breach in the suit. No failure in the sensors. It's as if the signal was pulled, severed from reality. Vega shuddered, placing her hands over her face. He wasn't taken, she whispered. He was folded out of the timeline. Erased from the record. The weight of that idea crushed us. If Connors could be wiped from existence without a trace, what hope did we have to escape this place? What was this thing, this presence, that consumed not just flesh, but memory, identity, and reality itself? Our comms remained dead, our radios silent. The outside world was unreachable. We were trapped in a space where the past and present bled together, where shadows became substance, and where the missing could cease to be at all. The warehouse seemed to breathe around us, alive with the rhythm of a predator that played with time itself, picking us off one by one, not through violence, but through erasure. And as the mist crept closer, I understood that Connors was only the beginning. We were next. The warehouse had become a tomb of whispers and shadows, the air thick with dread and unanswered questions. The disappearance of Connors was not just a loss. It was a fracture in our reality, an unspoken warning that we were no longer the masters of this place, but its prisoners. The mist had settled into an oppressive blanket, wrapping around us like a suffocating shroud, and every step we took felt measured against the weight of the unseen. It was Kumar who found the message. We had retreated to the fallback zone. A dimly lit alcove, fortified with crates and equipment, our sanctuary amidst the encroaching darkness. The air was stale, the faint hum of malfunctioning electronics barely audible beneath the pounding of our own hearts. Vega was silent, her eyes closed as if trying to shut out the nightmare unfolding around us. Kumar knelt near the entrance to the warehouse, his flashlight piercing the gloom as he scanned the concrete floor. There, smeared across the cracked surface, was a message written in something unmistakably alive fresh blood, dark and glossy against the cold gray. The words were scrawled in hurried, desperate strokes. Do not open the other. We stared in stunned silence, the words hanging in the air like a curse. Whose blood it was, none of us dared to ask. There was no indication of injury among the team, no one missing, no one claiming to have been wounded. The message was a ghost, a warning carved by a hand unseen, by a presence more terrifying than the unknown figure in the container. Vega's eyes snapped open, sharp and clear. She leaned forward, tracing the letters with a trembling finger. The other, she whispered, another container, another node. We had thought the nightmare was contained to the single relic we had found, the 049B marked steel coffin. But now, with this warning etched in blood, the truth revealed itself like a poison spreading through our veins. There was more, another container, another entity, another piece of the puzzle we never wanted to complete. Kumar pulled out the schematics we had retrieved earlier, fingers trembling as he flipped through the brittle pages. There is a section here marked Storage Unit, Delta 11, approximately 400 meters from this site. A container, identical, 2049B. Its status is marked active unknown. He swallowed hard. It wasn't in any manifest we received. No orders to access or disturb it. The weight of that revelation crushed us, The first container, the one we had dared to open, was not the only one. There was another, alive and breathing somewhere nearby, its secrets waiting in the dark. And something had sent the bloodied warning to stop us from finding it. Vega stood, her body tensed with a resolve that belied her exhaustion. We came here to close a wound, to contain a threat. But we opened a door to a network. A system designed to propagate itself. Every time a node awakens, the others pulse, react, and awaken in turn. We're not just fighting a single entity we're in the midst of a spreading infection. The mist shifted, as if in response, curling around our legs, cold and damp. The lights flickered again, and in the shifting shadows, I thought I saw shapes moving silent, elongated forms that disappeared when we tried to focus on them. The warehouse was no longer a building, but a living organism, breathing and watching. We debated our next move in hushed tones, the urgency of the message battling with the paralysis of fear. To seek out the other container was to risk awakening it, inviting a force beyond comprehension to extend its reach. To stay was to be slowly consumed, lost to the same fate as Connors. The silence was broken by a faint soft tapping, deliberate and slow, emanating from the direction of the sealed western wall. The rhythm was familiar. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. The same pattern we had heard before. The presence was calling again, beckoning us deeper into the web it had woven. Vega's gaze hardened. We don't have a choice. We must find the other container. We must understand what we've unleashed before it's too late. Kumar nodded, voice steady despite the fear. But we move carefully. No recordings, no transmissions, only observation. Silent protocol. The blood on the floor seemed to pulse under the flashlight beam, as if alive, a living warning written in pain and desperation. The message was clear. To open the other was to invite annihilation. And yet, the path forward was inevitable. We gathered our gear, steeling ourselves for the descent into the unknown. Each step weighted with the knowledge that we were walking toward a force that did not abide by the rules of nature, time, or sanity. As we prepared to leave Warehouse 17, the mist thickened once more, swirling at our feet like tendrils reaching to claim us. The tapping continued, steady and unrelenting, a heartbeat echoing through the darkness. And somewhere, in the distance, the other container waited, silent, alive, watching. We didn't know who or what to expect. When the black SUVs rolled silently onto the gravel outside Warehouse 17, the vehicles were unmarked. Matte black, with tinted windows that reflected the sparse light, like dark mirrors, swallowing every flicker of hope we clung to. No decals, no insignias, just the cold precision of machines built to serve secrets. To patrol shadows, where bureaucracy dared not tread. We had no contact from command for hours. No orders, except the fragmented warnings in the bloodstained message, and the chilling silence left by Connor's disappearance. When the SUVs arrived, they felt less like rescue and more like a reckoning. The doors opened with a mechanical hiss, and out stepped 2 men. Neither bore any form of recognizable uniform, rank, or only nondescript black suits, unyielding in their anonymity. Their faces were unreadable, expressions carved from stone and shadow, eyes hidden behind mirrored glasses that reflected nothing but the gray sky above. They moved with military precision, steps measured and unhurried, but every movement screamed control and authority. The kind of authority that bypasses questions, erases doubts, and demands compliance without reason. One of them, taller and broader, spoke first. His voice was low, filtered through a veneer of detached professionalism, but carrying an unmistakable edge of menace. "You are to cease all current operations immediately," he commanded, voice devoid of warmth or explanation. "All equipment will be confiscated. You will cooperate fully during the debriefing." The other simply surveyed the perimeter, hands clasped behind his back, a sentinel guarding invisible secrets. Vega stepped forward, her posture defiant, despite exhaustion. "We have discovered anomalies, biological entities, unknown properties. We require clearance to proceed with containment protocols." Her voice was steady, but I could see the tension coiled beneath her calm facade. The tall man's lips curled into something almost like a smile. "You have no clearance beyond what you have already been given." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like a shroud. "Further engagement is classified at the highest level." Unauthorized actions will be met with immediate and permanent repercussions. He looked past Vega, addressing all of us. Your knowledge of Project Lilith ends here. Kumar's eyes narrowed. What about Connors? What happened to him? We demand answers. The man regarded Kumar with a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Questions are not authorized. Your team will be isolated and debriefed under Directive 9. Any deviation will be considered a security breach. We exchanged uneasy glances, the unspoken truth hanging heavily between us. We were no longer operatives, but liabilities. The presence of these unmarked observers wasn't reassurance. It was a warning. They were here to contain information, to suppress the anomalies we had uncovered, and to ensure the secrets of Warehouse 17 remained buried. The confiscation began swiftly and methodically. Cameras, sensors, communication devices all seized with clinical efficiency. Our analog oscillographs, the only instruments still recording the strange signals, were dismantled and packed away like dangerous contraband. The blood-stained floor was wiped clean, as if erasing the message was the key to sealing the unfolding nightmare. Inside the warehouse, the blue mist lingered stubbornly, swirling lazily around the containers and casting unnatural hues on the concrete walls. The unmarked men inspected the site with detached disinterest. Yet their presence exuded an undercurrent of power that made even Vigauer, steadfast leader, shiver, with a mix of fear and frustration. As the debriefing room was prepared in a makeshift command center, the men insisted on one condition: total silence about the contents of the warehouse. No reports, no communication with external entities. Our testimony would be controlled, filtered, and when necessary, rewritten. That night, as I lay on the cot provided, my mind raced through the day's events: the biological relay, the mimicry, Connor's disappearance, and now these enigmatic observers who seemed more spectral than human. I wondered if they were government agents, private contractors, or something altogether different, operatives of a shadow war waged in silence and secrecy. Vega sat beside me, exhausted but resolute. They want control, she murmured. Control of the narrative, the evidence, the very memory of what happened here. Her eyes reflected the dim light, glinting with a mixture of anger and helplessness. But they can't control everything. We spoke quietly, piecing together fragments of information, the outlines of Project Lilith, the network of biological containers. The ripple effect triggered by our intrusion. The unmarked men had taken our tools, but not our knowledge. And that knowledge was a weapon in itself. Outside, the mist thickened, cloaking the facility in a living shadow that seemed to pulse with anticipation. From within its depths, the faint rhythm of tapping continued: 3 taps, pause. 3 taps echoing the silent message that had become our grim mantra. In the darkness beyond the warehouse walls, I felt eyes watching, calculating, waiting for the moment to reclaim what had been disturbed. The unmarked observers were only the beginning. The true guardians of this secret lay deeper in the shadows, beyond reach and comprehension. And as the night deepened, so too did the sense that the next chapter of this nightmare was already unfolding, silent, inexorable, and inevitable. The night wrapped itself around the facility like a suffocating shroud, and the heavy silence that descended on Warehouse 17 was a deceptive veil. In the dim glow of the emergency lights, barely flickering and casting elongated shadows on the cracked concrete floors, the remnants of our resolve clung tenuously to the fading embers of hope. We had been ordered into a muted compliance by the unmarked men, our technology stripped from us, our testimonies monitored and controlled. Yet despite this suffocating control, a primal urge to understand, to fight back against the encroaching oblivion, refused to be silenced. It was Kumar who first noticed the anomaly. The scanners we were forced to keep as relics, archaic devices buried deep in storage. Relics of a time when signals were simpler and less insidious, had started flickering with signs of life. It was a faint blip at first, a heartbeat barely perceptible amidst the static of interference. Then the frequency sharpened, a steady pulse emerging from the depths of the monitoring array. Kumar's fingers danced over the analog dials, his brow furrowed as the signal strengthened, becoming unmistakably coherent. "There's another," he said, voice tight with disbelief. "Another container, another signal, and it's active." The news hit us like a punch to the gut. The first container, 049B, was only part of a larger network and interconnected system of living prisons, biological weapons, and experimental entities waiting to be disturbed once more. The signal, though weak, emanated from a location roughly 400 meters to the southwest. A site we had no clearance to access, a location erased from every record we had seen. Vega, despite the exhaustion etched into her face, steeled herself. "We need to see it," she said, voice low but firm. "We need to know what we're dealing with before it's too late." The unmarked observers who had taken command were resistant at first, but the escalating signal had stirred unease even among their ranks. They agreed begrudgingly to allow a small team, led by Vega, and including Kumar and myself, to investigate. We were equipped with the barest essentials, the analog tools we were permitted to keep, and warned that any deviation would be met with severe consequences. The journey to the secondary site was surreal. The landscape was a desolate expanse. Patches of dead grass and broken concrete interspersed with twisted metal wreckage, relics of a long-forgotten Cold War installation. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, the mist from the first site creeping along the ground. Like creeping fingers reaching for us, a silent warning etched in frost. At the edge of a crumbling embankment, partially buried under layers of debris and earth, we found it the second container, identical in size and shape 2049B, its steel surface dull but intact. Unlike the first, its seal was unbroken, yet the faint pulse emanating from within was unmistakable. The air around it shimmered, the mist clinging with a strange, almost magnetic pull. Kumar set to work immediately, preparing the analog sensors and measuring devices with hands steady despite the charged atmosphere. Vega and I stood watch, eyes scanning the shifting fog for any sign of movement, any hint of the unknown lurking beyond our sight. As Kumar adjusted the frequencies, the container responded. The signal pulsed stronger, the vibrations translating into faint tapping, a rhythm eerily familiar. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again. It was a call, a beckoning, a message repeated across the chasm of decades, in silence. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath our feet, a low rumble that grew into a subtle vibration, spreading outward. The mist around the container thickened, swirling with unnatural energy, and a faint glow seeped from the seams of the steel, like the heartbeat of a restless giant. We could feel the weight of history pressing down upon us, the echoes of past experiments, of forgotten horrors waiting to awaken. Vega's voice was barely a whisper, laden with the gravity of understanding. "It's not just another node. It's a mirror, a twin, and like its sister, it's alive." The analogy chilled us. If the first container was a single voice in a chorus of shadows, this was its echo-connected, responsive, and equally dangerous. The network was awakening, the web weaving itself tighter, and we were caught in its snare. We debated our next move, aware that each step further into this web tightened the bonds of the unknown around us. The unmarked observer's watchful eyes bore into us, a constant reminder of the stakes. We were pawns in a game we barely understood, but the knowledge we had gained demanded action. The container's pulse quickened, and the mist coiled upward, like tendrils seeking a host. From the depths of its steel womb, a low, resonant hum, emerged a song of awakening. A call to all nodes, a symphony of shadows that promised to consume everything in its path. We were no longer merely observers. We were part of the signal, part of the network, and the network was hungry. The discovery of the second container did not bring relief. Instead, it cast a darker shadow across our already fraying nerves, a spectral weight born of a knowledge buried for decades and now clawing its way to the surface. After returning from the desolate field, stripped of much of our equipment and under strict surveillance by the unmarked observers, we managed to secure a small archive hidden deep within the facility's sublevels. It was here, beneath layers of dust and neglect, that we found the tape's analog U-matic cassettes, yellowed and brittle but intact. Labeled simply, Test Logs, Project Lilith, -1972. We gathered in the dim glow of the command room, a place where the stale air seemed to hold memories like a cathedral holds echoes. Vega, though weakened, took the lead. Her fingers trembling slightly, she slid the first tape into the ancient player. The screen flickered to life, grainy images filling the space, flickering like ghosts. The footage was raw and unpolished, a documentary of horrors and wonders from a time when science had just begun to grasp the boundaries of its own hubris. We saw scientists in outdated uniforms, faces etched with hope and dread, bustling around sterile rooms filled with equipment that seemed both primitive and alien. They were studying the biological unit contained within a steel vessel, not unlike the ones we had uncovered, its form obscured by fog and shadows, but unmistakably alive. The voiceover was mechanical, a clinical monotone describing protocols and observations. Subject designated as Lilith Prototype exhibits unique properties of neural mimicry and resonance. Initial tests indicate stable containment within zero-gravity simulated environments. However, subject demonstrates acute behavioral responses to human presence and absence. We watched as the footage shifted to a scene where technicians vacated the observation chamber, leaving the biological unit in isolation. The camera lingered on the container's interior, the swirling mists inside seeming to respond to the absence. It was a scene eerily familiar, a precursor to the chaos we now lived through. Suddenly, the unit reacted. The mist thickened and pulsed, coalescing into shapes that defied logic, shifting like liquid shadows. A low humming vibration filled the chamber, resonating through the walls and into the very bones of the observers. The scientists, watching remotely, scrambled to re-enter the room, panic etched on their faces. But it was too late. The footage captured only brief glimpses before static overwhelmed the screen. But the voiceover continued, strained and fragmented. Subject exhibits heightened neural activity in absence of direct human observation. Reflexive behaviors increase exponentially, leading to unpredictable environmental manipulation. Containment breach imminent. The screen flickered back, revealing alarms blaring, red lights flashing. The unit's tendrils reached out, slithering over surfaces, distorting cameras and sensors. The personnel attempted to isolate the area, initiating lockdown procedures. Then, silence. The tape showed only darkness. The last recorded sound was a distorted voice, desperate and frantic, repeating a warning. Do not leave it alone. Do not let it grow in the dark. Vega paused the tape, the room heavy with the weight of history's mistakes. They canceled the tests, she said softly, eyes haunted. Not because they failed to contain it, but because it changed when it was alone. When no one was watching. Kumar shook his head. They didn't understand that the subject wasn't just a biological weapon. It was a being that required observation, a presence to mirror and manipulate. I thought about the implications. The creatures we faced, the mimicry, the network of containers all depended on our interaction. The subject's power, amplified in the absence of human presence, growing chaotic and uncontrollable. We had awakened it by coming too close, by breaking the seal of observation that kept its darker nature in check. Vega's voice was a whisper now, fragile, yet resolute. It's a parasite of attention. It feeds on observation, learns through reflection, but in the dark, it becomes something else, something deadly. The unmarked observers moved through the command room silently, their faces masks of unreadable intent. They knew the history we had uncovered. They understood the danger, and yet, they enforced silence with iron precision, tightening the noose around our freedom. As the tape clicked to an end, the room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant, persistent tapping from the warehouse walls, the steady heartbeat of a nightmare waiting to reclaim its domain. The archive was more than a record. It was a warning, one we were perilously close to ignoring. And the shadows outside were waiting for us to make that fatal mistake. The air inside the dimly lit bunker was heavy with the residue of fear and the stale scent of recycled oxygen. Our small team, once hopeful and eager to contain what we had disturbed, now operated under the crushing weight of inevitability. Every creak of the aging structure, every distant drip of water from the rusted pipes, sounded like the heartbeat of some ancient predator lurking just beyond our sight. The blue mist still clung stubbornly to the corners of the warehouse, twisting and turning like tendrils reaching out to ensnare us, and with every passing moment, it felt as if the space itself was closing in. The last recorded report, painstakingly scribbled on a tattered notepad in the flickering light of an emergency lantern, was found among the scattered belongings of our team after the facility was sealed. It was incomplete, fragmented, but the horror and desperation it conveyed were unmistakable. The words began with the routine, the standard logs of an operation moving into its final phase. Containment protocols initiated at 0600 hours, it read. Unit 049B and Unit 072B both monitored closely for behavioral anomalies. Equipment limitations require manual observation. digital recording strictly prohibited. It was the beginning of a descent into chaos that none of us had anticipated. Viga's voice, calm but strained, narrated the sequence of events. The team had split into two groups, one to maintain surveillance of the first container, the other to approach the second. Communication was sparse and encrypted, with each message carrying the weight of urgency masked by a veneer of professional detachment. But then the subtle changes began. Subject in Unit 049B exhibited increased neural activity at 0715 hours, the report continued. Mist density fluctuated, correlating with spikes in atmospheric pressure. Attempts to measure pulse rates inconclusive. Subject shows signs of adaptation to environmental stimuli. It was a warning that seemed to go unheeded as we pressed on. Our instruments, limited and faltering, struggled to keep pace with the unpredictable nature of the entities we faced. The report chronicled the team's futile attempts to isolate the units, to restrict the mist's spread, to erect barriers against the encroaching unknown. But each effort met with subtle sabotage, equipment malfunctioning without cause, locks failing to engage, lights flickering in rhythmic patterns that mimicked the creature's tapping. Then came the entry that chilled us all. Subject 072B began displaying autonomous movement at 0730 hours. First observed mimicking human gestures. Synchronization with Unit 049B confirmed via low-frequency oscillation. Entities appear to be communicating. The eerie dance of mimicry was no longer a simple act of reflection. It was coordinated, purposeful, a language of shadows and resonance that intertwined the fates of the containers and the people trapped between them. The report became increasingly fragmented as it progressed, the handwriting growing erratic, the sentences unfinished. Personnel exhibiting signs of neural feedback. Visual and auditory hallucinations reported. Connor's missing, last seen near containment perimeter. Search initiated. Communication lost with Group B. The last legible line was scrawled with a desperation that cut through the sterile professionalism of the earlier entries. Containment breach imminent. Manual override failure. Evacuate immediately. If found, warn others do not engage without extreme caution. Project Lilith is alive. It learns. It adapts. It waits. After that, only smudges and illegible scrawls remained, as if the author's hand had been overcome by panic or worse. The chilling truth was clear. Our mission had failed, and the nightmare we had disturbed was far from contained. Vega, now pale and trembling, read the words aloud once more, before tucking the notepad away. "We thought we could control it," she said softly, voice breaking. "We thought we understood what we were dealing with, but it was never meant to be contained. It was meant to be unleashed." The unmarked observers maintained a cold distance, their faces unreadable behind their mirrored glasses. They had sealed off the facility shortly after the last transmission ceased. Their silence, a heavy blanket over the horrors we had uncovered. Yet, despite their efforts to bury the truth, the legacy of Project Lilith lingered. The containers were still out there, nodes in a network that transcended our understanding of biology, technology, and time. The mist still moved, in the shadows, pulsing with a hunger that was both ancient and insatiable. And somewhere, deep within the forgotten recesses of the facility, the biological entities waited. Silent, patient, and watching. Waiting for the next intrusion. The moment the red alert began flashing across every screen in the command center, a palpable wave of dread swept through the team. The alarm wasn't just a signal. It was a premonition, a harbinger of collapse that screamed louder than any siren. We had crossed an invisible threshold, breached a protocol that was meant to remain untouched. The air grew heavier, each breath harder to draw, as if the very atmosphere was resisting the impending descent into chaos. Protocol Red had been activated, the last most desperate line of defense, and the harbinger of utter containment failure. The archive, the digital lifeline to everything we had painstakingly documented, began to unravel. Files corrupted one after another, fragments of data dissolving into incomprehensible noise. What had once been meticulous records, invaluable evidence of the nightmare we had awoken, was now a cacophony of static and distortion. The videos we relied on to understand the entity's behavior fizzled into oblivion. The audio tracks rendered useless by a garbled mess of interference. The written logs flickered on the screens, glitching and warping. Words dissolving into nonsensical patterns before vanishing entirely. Our instruments, designed to capture and preserve the truth, became instruments of obfuscation. The system's own defenses were turning against us, erasing what little proof we had left, like a digital reaper wielding blades of corruption. Our data was being rewritten, recoded, repurposed by something with a mind of its own, something that existed not just in physical form, but in the very code and signals we used to contain it. Vega stood frozen before the main console, fingers hovering over the keys, her face pale and strained. "They never wanted us to see this," she whispered, eyes fixed on the cascading errors flooding the screen. "They never wanted the truth to survive." The unmarked observers, silent and inscrutable as ever, watched without intervention. Their cold presence was a stark reminder that our fate was no longer ours to decide, that we were mere pawns in a game played by shadows beyond comprehension. Their lack of action was a message in itself, a silent acknowledgement of the disaster unfolding and the inevitability of its conclusion. The last intact file, a shaky handheld recording from the early days of containment, began to play with a flicker. The grainy footage showed the creature within the container, pulsing with eerie life, its tendrils twitching as if sensing the approaching end. The distorted audio carried a faint mechanical laughter, a sound not human, not animal, but something altogether alien and chilling. Suddenly, the feed was cut. The screen went black, replaced by a stark message in bold red letters. Protocol read, "Engaged archive corrupted." A metallic laugh echoed through the speakers, distorted and warped, reverberating in the silence that followed, like the dying breath of a nightmare. It was a sound that chilled the soul, a final taunt from the entity we had tried to contain. It was a declaration that control was lost, that the boundaries between observer and observed, hunter and prey, had dissolved into chaos. The containment breach was no longer hypothetical, it was a reality. The entity was free, its influence spreading beyond the walls of Warehouse 17, infiltrating networks, warping reality itself. The red mist that had once been confined to the container now seeped into the facility's every corner, a living stain that pulsed with malicious intent. As the alarm blared and systems failed, we scrambled to salvage what little remained. But the truth was clear. Our mission had ended in failure. The protocol read was not a safeguard, but a death knell, a signal that everything we fought to contain was now beyond control. The last moments were a blur of frantic orders, collapsing systems, and shadows moving just beyond sight. The team was fractured, scattered, swallowed by the encroaching darkness and the insidious mist. Our voices echoed in the void, lost beneath the cacophony of destruction and the entity's sinister laughter. And then silence. The archive was lost, the evidence erased, and with it, the last hope for understanding. Only the entity remained patient, eternal, and watching, waiting for the next observer to breach the veil, waiting to rewrite the story anew.